My name is Jason.
My name is Judd.
And this is The Sixth Ring, a podcast about the Trophy tabletop role-playing game. Judd and I today are joined by a special guest. That special guest is the creator of the Trophy role-playing game, Jesse Ross. Jesse, welcome to The Sixth Ring.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So, listeners, as of this recording, we have just put out the final PDF of Trophy Dark, which is very exciting, and we wanted to have Jesse on the show to just talk about Trophy Dark in depth, do a really nice deep dive on this book. But before we begin that, Jesse, let me just say congratulations on Trophy Dark.
Thank you.
It looks amazing. It is, I've already run several things from it just since it's been out. I'm really, really excited about how it turned out.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it was definitely a labor of love, but I'm super proud of it and can't wait for everyone else to get to run games out of it.
Yeah, it's going to be great. So I think the way we're going to do this, it's going to be kind of like an interview, essentially, but we're going to try to keep it kind of casual and conversational as far as that goes. But why don't we just kick off with a sort of big picture question here for you, Jesse, which is, we have a lot of fantasy tabletop role-playing games out there right now. We're almost in kind of like a renaissance of fantasy gaming, right? Which sounds weird because the hobby's always consumed by fantasy, right? But it seems especially so right now.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, what do you think makes Trophy Dark stand out? What does it do that other fantasy role-playing games don't?
Ooh, yeah, that's a good question. I think the biggest thing, and this is something that obviously it was all the Trophy games and world was built out of the sort of Gauntlet best practices, right? And so there's a really heavy emphasis on collaboration, on kind of what you've called the writer's room approach, and just on reincorporation and theme. So that's something that I've woven into the game and is really important to me. I want everyone who comes to the table to have an opportunity to weigh in, and that's just not something that you get from every other game, and especially fantasy games, which have that kind of heritage of GM fiat. So I would say that's probably the major thing. Beyond that, because it is explicitly a one-shot, and most fantasy games, they're sort of built on kind of the power fantasy and escalation, the idea that you are playing these characters who are eventually going to die or be broken in some way offers a lot of freedom and liberation, right? Because you don't have to build this perfect min-maxed character. You can say, this is my flawed character I'm going into this session with, and if they go out, which they likely will, that's great. So I can just play them in whatever way makes the most sense for the story specifically. And one thing we've talked a lot about, too, is just the idea that because you're kind of meeting these characters at the end of their journey, we don't know their whole backstory, and you don't need to come to the game with a whole backstory. And so that sort of discovery of their story through play is another thing that I think just not a lot of role-playing games and fantasy role-playing games are doing. I
like what you put in the book. In the book, you have this line that I don't remember before, but I noticed it this time, which is, we are seeing these characters at the end of their story.
Right.
And I think that's so good, because I think it says everything that you need to know about Trophy Dark. Right. We are seeing the end. They had a life before this, and we might learn something about it, but this is the conclusion, and we're going to focus on the drama of that conclusion. I think that's pretty great.
Exactly, yeah.
We have been marketing Trophy Dark as a one-shot, and it's a good thing to say, right? It's a good tagline with a one-shot fantasy horror game. I've been playing it as a two-shot lately.
Yes.
Doing a couple rings in the beginning in one session, then rings 3 through 5. It's really good as a two-shot.
It's really good.
It's really good. Yeah, it has this, just that one extra session, you just live with the characters a little bit longer, and you just learn so much more about them, and you get to let everything kind of breathe, and it just feels so, so good. So one or two-shot game, I think.
In a game where it's so much based on the kind of interpersonal drama between the characters, having that space where they can learn a little bit about each other, and you get a little bit more insight into them and what makes them who they are. And especially because you can use those first two rings or that first session as a way to see them succeed. Then when you get to the end, rings 3, 4, and 5, and seeing them go out, it's that much more bittersweet.
Yeah, that's awesome. Judd, you want to jump in?
I was wondering technically what you all were doing differently for between a one-shot and a two-shot? Was it just pacing? Was there a ring you were kind of drawing out a little bit? Because the game is so structured, so I feel like when you talk about technique, you can really make it specific, which is interesting.
No, that's a great question. What I've been doing is I do character creation and like just the normal game introduction stuff, plus the first 2 rings.
Yep.
And that's about a 3-hour session that I've been doing. What I do, basically just, it's something you and I have talked about a lot, Judd, which is just asking lots of questions. It just creates more room for that.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that this version of Trophy Dark, the final version of Trophy Dark, has is every incursion and every ring and every incursion has questions that can be posed to the players. That wasn't the case in the original releases, right? The original releases, it was up to the GM to think of things, but we've built the questions into the final book. So yeah, it was just time to sort of do those things, just to kind of explore it. I mean, I think you can do it no problem and still have a perfectly good experience in say a 4-hour one shot.
Yeah.
But that extra hour and a half to 2 hours or so to kind of stretch it out just gives you time to really like kind of play with things and reincorporate things. I mean, it feels really good. Jesse, have you done the 2-shot version yet?
Yeah, I actually ran it. I've run it a few times as a multi-shot game, mostly as 2. I did run one as a 3-shot just to see how it played out,
wow.
and it didn't work as well.
It feels like it was room to break down a little bit.
It was a little too thin, yeah. But as a 2-shot, it works really great. And what you've been doing, Jason, in a lot of what you've been putting out, like kind of cutting it off after ring 2, feels like the best spot, because then you get the first session feeling more like a traditional fantasy game.
It does.
Because the first ring is all about overcoming obstacles and like seeing them achieve and have victories. And that feels very fantasy, heroic fantasy. And then ring 2 is where they start to get like a lot of the environmental problems.
It's dungeoneering, right?
Right. Exactly. And so that first session feels like D&D or something else, right? It has a lot of that kind of DNA, so that when you get to that second session and you kick it off with betrayals, it just like starts that downward spiral, which feels really good.
Yeah, I agree completely. I'm really interested in something you didn't say when I asked the question earlier, but I know was maybe in the back of your mind, and it's always in the back of my mind with it, is the idea of Trophy Dark especially being fantasy horror.
Right. Yes.
That feels important to me because I feel like even though we are in this renaissance of fantasy tabletop role-playing games, there's so many cool things coming out there, I don't think many of them really do proper horror.
There are very few, yeah. There are a couple, notably Best Left Buried, I'll give props to. And there's a Cthulhu Dark Ages game, which I have not played, but that's also the vein that it's supposed to be in. But yeah, fantasy is like really underserved in horror, which is strange given the fact that you're going into dark places and fighting monsters.
Right.
It's intrinsically a horror genre, right?
Yeah,
I say this all the time on Fear. What do you think, Judd? Like fantasy horror?
I was roommates with Brett Gillen actually while he was writing The Final Girl, not to like be that guy, name dropping, but
Brett Gillen, if you're listening, I will get that license from you to do 502E. Just throwing that out there.
He ran a D&D 4E game when 4E came out, and he's a big horror fan, obviously. And he wrote his description of like what the setting would be like, and we posted it on NWorld, and everybody was like, "This is the darkest thing I've ever seen." And Brett's response was, "This is what the world would look like if we take the monster manual at face value."
Exactly.
Yeah. I don't want to say it's word choice while you're playing, because it's not quite word choice. There's like a stancy thing. Like there's something else that's got to go on for you to take it seriously. Not take it seriously, but take it as horror. And I think it is that taking the monster manual at face value was a phrase that I really love.
I love that phrase. That's a great. I've never heard that, but I love it because he's right. If you strip away marketing, if you strip away artwork, even if you strip away cultural nostalgia, if you strip away Stranger Things, if you strip away all that stuff that D&D has around it, and you just consider the monsters for what they are presented as, sort of as intrinsic creatures, you know, like this is a creature that does these things and looks like this, it should be terrifying. Yeah, I agree, Jesse. Like, I think that horror is underserved, you know, or it's underplayed.
I will say to that idea of like taking the monster manual at face value, that the horror that is inherent there is undercut by the fact that you have stats to all these monsters, right? Which explicitly says like these are fightable, killable things. And in Trophy Dark, that's not the case, right? Like you can't fight these things, and that I think is where the horror really is, right? Like these are not things with stats. These are not known quantities.
They don't have names either.
Yeah.
I think that's great. I could talk all day about fantasy horror, and I have in many other places. If you want to, many other fine podcast offerings. Check it out, listeners. So moving along a little bit here, let's talk about some of the mechanical additions.
Sure.
I think that came as a big surprise to readers. I talked to so many people who maybe don't follow the Discord super closely, or they,
Right.
are not like super keyed in, and they were very surprised by the new die rolls. And so maybe just kind of run through some of the die rolls, and in particular, why add them in and what sort of needs at the table were they a
Sure.
response to?
So not just new die rolls, but modified die rolls as well, right? Because we
That's
should
true.
talk about the reduction roll. So the core of the game, the risk roll, that stayed the same. The rune roll, that stayed the same. Like that's kind of really the heart of the game. Really, this came out of playtest. What did we find out at the table? What worked, what didn't, what gave the right feel, and what didn't? And probably the two biggest needs that we saw and asks that we got were for some kind of like helping or aiding or assisting role. People wanted to work together, which makes a little bit more sense in Trophy Gold, but it still has relevance for Trophy Dark.
Yeah.
So we have the new help role, and essentially it's a trick because it's not super helpful at all.
It's not helpful at all.
It's-
No, I know.
Well, it's a little helpful, but it's mostly dangerous.
It's a little helpful, yeah.
Yeah. But having it there like gives people the window
sense
into like
that there's something,
right that,
yeah.
that they can help, right? Like I want to help, so I want to make these rolls and I got to do this thing. But it's because the game is so dangerous, like that's a really risky prospect, right? So my hope actually with that roll is that people will use it and be like, well, that was terrible. I'm not helping anyone
Do
anymore.
this again, yeah.
And realize that it's a bad call and certainly not helpful to you.
I mostly use it in Trophy Gold. Trophy Gold is where I see it most often because I play that more often, but also
Yeah.
just because it's Trophy Gold, And the players always want to do the help roll. They always want to do it.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, go ahead and do it. And it's like never good. Like it's 1 out of every 5 or 6 times it gets
Right.
used. It's like the right call. Right.
Which is what it would be, right? Because
Yeah.
you're really looking for 6s there. So you kind of have a 1 in 6 chance
Yeah.
of it being a good thing.
Yeah.
And it's usually not. But anyways, it's in the game and it's fun,
It is fun. Yeah.
importantly, and it signals something about how the game should be played. So that's the help roll. The other biggest ask was like, how do we fight each other?
Yes.
The game has betrayal in it.
Mhm.
And how do we like turn against each other? Or a lot of the instances that I saw in my own games that I was running was like, we both want to get to this treasure, or we both want to like persuade this demon, or whatever it is. Like it's a competition. So that's where the contest roll comes in.
Right.
It's a totally different mechanic, but it feels very natural in the game. Like it feels like something that was there from the beginning because it just worked so well and fits so many needs. It just heightens that sense of betrayal and
Mhm.
tension, and you're basically collecting dice to roll against another player, and you're looking for your highest dice, specifically 6s, and then you work your way down. But importantly, you get a bunch of extra for free dice the higher your rune is. So
Right.
it incentivizes those players who have maybe made bad choices or gotten into trouble or had bad luck because they're sort of working on behalf of the forest and it wants to reward them. So it naturally creates this idea of like, well, they have all these extra dice, so that means I need to throw a bunch of dark dice in, and then that person's rune goes up and it begins the escalation. So that's the contest roll, and I love it. It feels really great.
Yeah, I did too. As you know, because we talked about this privately, I was skeptical of the contest roll.
Yeah.
I was skeptical of the need for it because the way I run games, we just talk about that. Like if we're
Yep.
going to have player versus player conflict, we just discuss it as players and we figure out what's the best thing to do. So I ran Trophy Dark for years without such a thing, and it was fine. But as you say, it was the number one ask. Like
Yep.
everyone wanted it. Everyone wanted it. I have had a chance to get it on the table now, probably like 3 or 4 times in total since it's been a thing. And I love it. It just does all the right things. It makes the story go exactly how the story should go. It's kind of like the help roll in the sense that like engaging in the contest roll means someone is maxing out their rune,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
they might win, but they're going down,
Yep.
Thematically, it fits really well. And the players seem to love it. Like they have a really, really good time with it.
Every anecdote that I've gotten has been like, oh my gosh, this feels really good. Like
Yeah.
it's the perfect way to sort of cap off the game. And it
that
really
Ring
is like,
5 moment.
yeah. Yeah, it's perfect for that. The last major addition / change is the new reduction roll, which got a little bit of a teaser to our Discord and a few other groups earlier on. And essentially the way that the old roll worked, so it's basically like a way to reduce your ruin. So kind of heal yourself or improve your odds and chances of sort of making it through. But the way that it used to work is you rolled, and if you succeeded, then your rune went down. And if you didn't, then nothing happened.
Yep.
And it was kind of a boring, like, well, why'd I do that? It just wasn't helpful. It didn't feel good. So now the way that it works is if you do this thing, if you make this roll, your rune is going down anyways, but the thing you have to do is betray the party in some very apparent, very explicit way. And what you're rolling to find out is whether you get noticed in your betrayal or not, which just feels really good because either you get away with something or you have a mechanically enforced tension in the game, right? Because someone gets busted out. That also, again, feels really good. And that was just through experience of play and figuring out what worked and what the game needed.
Yeah, that was one of those like, okay, we've played this game enough. We've lived with this game long enough to know that this particular part of it is not broken. I don't think that's the right way to put it, but
it's boring. It was boring.
1 in 6 times you did the reduction roll, literally nothing happened. Sometimes more than that, depending on where the rune was, right? So it's a good fix. It feels really good. And all of these rolls, in my opinion, what I think makes them so great is they heighten the drama at key moments.
Yep.
By the time the reduction roll comes out, we're ready for that betrayal. We're ready to see it be played out. By the time the contest roll happens, we've had this building, bubbling tension, and we're ready to see it burst out and what that looks like. And mechanically, it's this nice like interplay between our desires for the story and the game supporting those desires, right? It just it's structured really, really nicely. Judd, you want to jump in here? I've been talking a lot.
I'm looking at the notes and eager to talk about the new layout. I'm literally sitting here.
Let's go there. Yeah,
waiting to talk about that. I'm like, rolls, whatever. Although I will add one thing to the rolls that I think is cool is that I think it teaches. I think a lot of this game is good about teaching, and I'm really interested to see a group of role players who have learned to role play through this text and role players who are just starting coming across it. I think it's tutorial in a lot of ways, and one of them is when to roll the dice.
Yes.
I think that is going to be interesting. And the other way that I think it's tutorial, I'll segue to the layout, which is what you need or what you might need in your notes to run a game. Which I think, to run any adventure. Like, I think that's a big, I spend a lot of time in like new GM subreddits, and it's a big anxiety. It's like, hey, I'm about to run my first game. What do I need?
Yeah.
I started with the beginning where the gods were made, and now I don't know what to do, and the way that Trophy Dark structures things is really interesting. And I think the layout is great.
I respond to it very strongly. My own game design, this is a focus, right? Like, how do we prep the GM? How does a GM prep? I love it. Let's talk about the layout. So brand new layout.
Yep.
Next to the artwork, it's the star of the show. It is great. How is it different from the old Codex releases, and why'd you do it the way you did it?
Sure. Let's just talk really briefly. I'm sure everyone who's listening to this knows all about how Trophy Dark is structured, but just at a high level, you have an incursion is your adventure that you're playing through. It consists of 5 rings, each with their own, what we call terrors and temptations. Then you also have a couple other things. So the incursion has a theme, which is just like a 1 or 2 word or short phrase that describes the incursion. You have an introduction. You have moments, which are little bits of narrative that you can kind of sprinkle in through the session. And then you have conditions, which are whenever anyone's rune goes up, this is like a negative effect that they feel. So those are all of the bits. And essentially in the original Codex versions, those were just kind of listed in order. So you had your theme, your introduction, you had all of your moments, all of your conditions, and then you had each ring in sequence. And that worked. It was playable. Like, you could find what you were looking for. It was fine. Totally serviceable. But I personally found it hard to find things. When I was running games, I'd be like, I know this was in here somewhere, but like, I don't remember where it is. And then, someone has a new condition and I got to flip back and now I got to find the right one. And, moments, those are all the way in the back. I'm just going to make something up, I guess, because now I have to find that page of the PDF.
Yeah.
And so with this, I was really trying to lean into more of a dashboard mindset. So if you have the book open in front of you, on the 2 pages that you're looking at are essentially everything that you will need in that moment.
Yes.
The incursions are set up to have 6 pages always, no matter what. First page is like your color or your cover to the incursion. So it starts with a big image, has the title, has the author, has usually the introduction or the introductory poem, which is a very common thing in Trophy. And then it has your content warnings, which was something that we never did before.
Mm-hmm.
And those are really helpful. If you just want to skim through and be like, what is this got in it? What is going to work with my playgroup or not?
Do I need cannibalism tonight?
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
A question I frequently ask myself.
So that's a first page. And then each ring is its own page. So as you're jumping into it, your left-hand side is the cover, your right-hand side is the first ring. And it's always your terrors, the like awful things that are happening, and your temptations. And each ring usually has some sort of like little introductory line as well to kick it off. You can think of it kind of like a ring-specific moment to lead this story.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the bottom of every page are moments. So as you flip through the rest of the pages, you will always have 2 or 3 moments just at the bottom at the ready. So if you just want to pluck something out, it's there. If you're on ring 3, you could grab them from ring 2 or 3 because they're both right in front of you.
They're right in front of you.
And then we split the conditions up into each being its own kind of mini table of 6 entries. And there are usually 2, some have 3, but I think there's only 1 incursion that has just 1 list of conditions. But essentially you have a little table there. And usually I tried to space them out so you have 1 or 2 on kind of rings 2 or 3 because ruin should be going up there. And then 1 or 2 on 4 and 5 because that's really where you're going to need them. And then there are a few other signposts. So like there are lots of questions, as you mentioned. So those are all called out with little icons. The major, whether it's terror or temptation that's in the ring, is bolded. So there's just a lot of like little visual design cues to try to make it easier to navigate.
Judd, as you were looking through the PDF, what stood out to you about the layout? Like what spoke to you about it?
I'm looking at the Forbidden Archives, which of course, as a librarian, that's where I ended up. If we hammered down like a new GM's anxiety down to like its raw roots, it'd be like, what are you really scared of? And what people I think are scared of is I'm not gonna be able to say something cool when I need to say something cool.
Yeah.
And it's really easy to look at any one of these pages and find something cool to say, whether it's a question that's italicized, whether it's a description, whether it's something that happens to the player because they failed to roll. If you're not sure of anything else, you can look at the bottom black bar, which is just goes right across the page, and you can pick a moment. And it's just really easy to find something cool to say at all times, which is huge. I think that's just a big deal.
I think I've run 3 incursions now from the new book, and my biggest impression is this is a layout that was made to be used. Like it is usability forward. And like Judd said, that's super important. I am not a GM who feels these moments of helplessness and trepidation, but I remember what that was like. And I imagine this is going to be a helpful tool for a lot of people, right? And even as seasoned a GM as I am, I found it incredibly helpful all the same to have all that stuff like presented in this like really neatly organized way. I just felt very supported and empowered. And that was great. Yeah. From a usability standpoint, the layout is so good. It's a real achievement as far as that goes. Jesse, you should be proud of it.
Thanks.
Well, incursions. Incursions are the bulk of the book. The book is about, 180 pages, something like that?
Yeah.
And I would say probably fully 70% of that is incursions, maybe a little more.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
22 incursions, a handful of them by you, the rest by other authors that we found in different places, but ultimately they're all part of the Trophy community. I got a chance to sort of read them all at once because I was doing the final quality check. And I was very impressed with how coherent everything felt, even though it was by a bunch of different authors.
Yeah.
I think a lot of that is credit to Lauren because Lauren did an amazing job like making the edit and the words feel cohesive with each other. But I also think there's something to be said for just this selection of incursions. There are so many incursions out there, third-party things we've published that are not in this book. But these 22 in the book feel so particular to this book. And I want to get your thoughts on that, Jesse. Like, why these incursions?
Yeah. One, I will just say these are all like phenomenal writers. Everyone who has contributed to this, every incursion writer is just top notch. Evocative imagery, compelling ideas, stick in your brain visuals, like they're just solid. Like it's just so much good writing. I'm constantly impressed that I get to work with all of these people. What we were trying to go for were a few different things. One, we have this idea of the forest, but through the expansions of the game and all of the codex issues, like we've broadened that scope. But at its heart, like there's a lot of dark fairy tale, not just dark fantasy, but like dark fairy tale that's like a part of the trophy DNA. And so keeping that front and center was really important. And so a lot of these incursions have references to that kind of fairy tale folklore idea. That's just woven into a lot of these incursions. Part of what we were trying to do is we're setting the stage for what the world of Trophy looks like going forward. And so we wanted to make sure that the types of things that we're introducing here also make sense in the broader scope of Trophy Gold and Trophy Loom. And so we're trying to introduce some of these characters, monsters, ideas that are going to trickle through. So again, with that fairy tale idea, we have a lot of giants that feature in these stories, not always front and center. In fact, very rarely front and center, but like are there and present. And like the concept of that bigness and the history of this world is there. With the fairy tale idea, lots of like fairies and fae and strange creatures like that. We have bees, because bees are neat. And like
There's a preponderance of bees in the trophy setting throughout all three books.
Bees are really great. They're like my orc analog.
Yeah.
Primarily, we just wanted to make sure that we're capturing the type of horror that's inherent in Trophy, which is a lot of body horror stuff, a lot of weird violence, a lot of interpersonal
strange
stress.
religiosity is a big part of it.
Yeah, there's a lot of religiosity stuff there. What themes were you guys seeing popping up?
Judd, I don't know any human on this planet who kind of like delves into like fantasy settings and the fantasy underpinnings of the hobby more than you do. What was your impression of these incursions and the trophy world?
I mean, it felt like people who have been reading and digesting this kind of fantasy RPG their whole lives, and then on the other side also kind of loved horror, and then were suddenly told like, hey, you can do both. And so suddenly it just kind of opened up. It wasn't a specific theme. What it reminded me of, honestly, is other games that I feel like Dungeon Crawl Classics and Mothership, where they kind of show you how to play through the adventures. This, I feel like the text also shows you how to play, but then it also says, and here's how to play. Like, you know what I mean? It's like another instructional guide of like, here's how to play. And also here it is again in the structure of the adventures. And you don't have to go out and buy a bunch of adventures. They're right here in the book. Here you go. It wasn't a particular theme that stuck out to me, Jason. It was the idea that like, hey, this could be a book that I just stick in my bag at a con. And if we have a couple hours, we could rock out.
Right.
Real fast. It's a game that if a friend visited for the weekend and said the thing that they always say, which is, I haven't really gamed in a long time, you could take this out and just get going really fast. I love how fast. I mean, I feel like I hadn't read the Forbidden Archives yet, but I feel like I'm 10 minutes away from being able to do it. Like, I feel like I could get everybody to make up characters, and then I could be like, hey, folks, take a break for 10 minutes. I'm going to read this over, and then we'll go.
If you take a short break between each ring, you can literally run them on the fly. Like, you don't have to read them ahead of time.
Yeah.
Going back to this idea of like the type of fantasy, which is just something that's really been stuck in my head ever since the PDF came out. I'm pretty steeped in fantasy role-playing games. It's basically how I got started with the hobby. That was kind of my entree into the hobby, like it was for so many people. But for me, my entree into the hobby was through 2E. And 2E was all about hyper-detailed settings and big worlds and loads of setting detail. And I loved all that as a kid. That was really, really great for me. I love that. What I think that Trophy does that's interesting is there is pretty clearly a world here. And it's a world we're continuing to unfurl.
Right.
But there's a world. But you don't know everything about this world from
Right.
reading the adventures. You know something about the world. You know certain key things. But a lot of it is left occluded. A lot of it is in the background. A lot of it is mysterious. And it's that negative space. It's that mystery that is sort of underpinning all of these incursions that appeals to me.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes me want to play because I want to figure out, what does this mean? Right? Like, the incursion's telling me some things, but it's not telling me everything. And to some degree, we're going to have to figure out what this
Right.
world is about. We're going to have to figure out what these things are.
Yeah.
And so that has a huge amount of appeal to me as somebody who is a fan of not just fantasy and horror, but like a fan of surrealist fiction or like movies like David Lynch films, things like that. You know, this ambiguity that wants to be explored. That, I think, is what makes it special. It's a setting that is always like kind of moving, you know, like it always is sort of like dancing around. Sometimes you grab onto it and something becomes real, but most of the time it's just there. It's and that also that gives it, like, when you're playing it gives the world a feeling of oldness and bigness that the characters can't even comprehend, right? Which I think is pretty great.
I'm really glad you said that. I have a lot of love for things like the World of Darkness meta narrative, but I could never play in that, right? There was just too much there. And there's a sense that, like, you're going to get it wrong.
Yes.
If you don't know all the lore, you're going to play it wrong. Or if you include something that doesn't fit in the canonical lore, then you're doing it wrong, right? And you have to rewind and do everything differently. And I wanted to make a game and a series of games where you have permission to change things, where very little is canonical, where the story happens at the table and not in between the pages of the book.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the individual incursions, do you have a favorite, Jesse? I do, but
that's such a mean question.
It's a horrible question. I don't mind answering, so you go ahead.
Okay. Oh God, I don't think I can pick one, unfortunately.
Highlight a few for us.
I'll offer a few. So let's go with the first one that I laid out, which was Gift of the Sea by Gabriel Robinson, because that opened up something for me about the world of Trophy itself and the direction that I wanted things to go and what was meaningful in the setting, which was that folk horror vibe. So it's essentially Wicker Man at sea. And it's great. Visually, it's great. Conceptually, it's great.
It's Midsommar at sea, isn't it?
Oh, yes. Even better.
Oh, wow.
Yes. Yeah. Yep. Exactly. Leaning into kind of those folk horror vibes was really eye-opening to me about how Trophy could work and should work and where it needed to go. Huge kudos to Gabriel for that one. Also, A Warm and Pleasant Hum by Michael Van Vliet. That's the one with the bees. And despite Michael saying that he doesn't want to be known for bees, he is very good with them. They're terrifying. The incursion is like claustrophobic and saccharine sweet, and the visuals in it are just mind-blowing. Like, when I read that the first time and got to the part where a halo of bees swarms around someone and no one knows why, as if it's a crown, I was just like, I have to draw this picture. Like, I have to make this real.
Yeah.
So I love that one just for the antagonists, for the imagery of it. Like, that one is just awesome. And then of the ones that were like a part of the stretch goals for this, probably Blackberry Jam by Ira Grace.
Yeah, it's fun.
It is so different from all of the others because you're not treasure hunters, you're little kids. It's got like this really great Stranger Things / It kind of vibe with kid horror. And again, visually, it's super awesome. It's like fairy tale. And there's just a lot of good advice for how to run Trophy when your characters are kids, which can be scary. And so huge kudos again to Ira for that one because it's just such a great incursion.
You know, we haven't talked about it too much yet, but bringing up Blackberry Jam makes me want to talk about it, which is we took a lot of care when it came to safety and consent in this game. That's an increasingly important topic in the hobby, rightfully so. The Gauntlet's always been on the forefront of it, which I'm very proud of. Every page of this book, every part of its construction, everywhere it needs to happen, the book is very, very concerned about making sure everyone's having a good time.
Yep.
And everyone is doing it in a way that is like not going to spoil someone else's time. And I love that. And Blackberry Jam is a great example because Ira wrote almost like a little guide to precede the incursion that
Yeah.
is like, when you're playing kids in a horror context, like, what is that like?
Yeah.
What sorts of things should we do? How can you like slightly reframe the narrative or the context to make it appropriate for like kids? He listed these like 3 approaches toward violence
Yeah.
towards children, and any one of which your group can kind of agree to do. And I loved that. It was like such a great way of presenting the idea of child horror in a role-playing game context. It's awesome. Getting back to incursions, I do have a favorite in the book. I love all of them. Don't get me wrong. I love all of them. I've published all of them. They're all in the book because they all present a piece of the puzzle of
Yeah.
the world. My favorite to run is Giant's Carcass by Sabine. I
Yeah.
just love that one.
It's really good.
It is, it's the
Super
kind of stuff
gross.
I love. You know, it's
Yeah.
it's so fucking gross, and I love really gross shit. But it's gross in this way that has this poetry to it. It's this like, how do we make something totally gnarly and grotesque and quite extreme in the body horror? How do we take that and make beauty and art out of it? What does that
Yeah.
look like? And like, this is such a good response to that. So
Nice.
And Sabine is such a good writer for that kind of
Sabine's excellent.
work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And doing the German translation, we should mention. Of
Yes.
this.
Oh, nice.
Judd, anything you want to say about Incursions?
Yeah, I mean, I love the Tomb of 10,000 Dreams. It just feels like the most
fun.
D&D-ish of them,
Just around that
but
one.
on a weird side angle, and the dreaminess and the strangeness of it, almost surreal. I love it. I love it. I'm eager to see people look at this structure and then see how weird they can take it.
Yeah.
Just because I think it can get really strange. And when I was running Trophy Gold, we started talking about like different kind of ways to run an adventure. And there was a incursion idea I had for a spider that like walks through time.
Mm-hmm.
You could totally do it. Like, it's just easy. Like,
Yeah.
you ask questions to figure out where it's walking in, and then where in the characters' lives it walks in and causes damage or tries to eat something from your memory. And I think it's kind of neat. So I liked 10,000 Dreams because it felt almost familiar.
Well, we should mention that
Yeah.
Tomb of 10,000 Dreams is the first incursion.
Yeah.
Right.
Jesse wrote that one, and it was the first incursion. Like, it came with the game originally in Codex.
Right.
Yeah.
That's actually kind of an interesting side question, because Tomb of 10,000 Dreams, Jesse, I know that you like changed all of your original incursions for this
Yeah.
book. They all have like additions and changes. And I ran Tomb of 10,000 Dreams a few weeks ago, and I was playing those changes for the first time, and really enjoyed it, really loved it. I'm curious why you decided to make those additions and changes. Like, where did that come from?
Part of it was because I have had a chance to run all of these now more times
Yeah.
and learned what worked and what didn't, and what felt good and what didn't. Part of it is because we've gotten so many other incursion writers in, and like they've brought great advances and new thinking to how incursion should be structured and what the right length is and what kind of additional information you need. The first ones that I wrote were tiny. They were so short. There was
They
like
were real
almost
short.
nothing
Yeah.
there.
Mhm.
Yeah. So it was good to be able to like look at them with fresh eyes and say, well, what does this need? Like, how can this be made better, and how can it work better? So yeah, all of my original ones got refined and added to, and I think they feel a lot better now. They're, again, more cohesive as a part of the overall set, and hopefully scarier and weirder in some ways too.
I think so too. Yeah. One of yours was Witchwood.
Yeah.
And I used to always talk about how I didn't like the monster in Ring 4, right? Like, I was like, I always change the monster, Jesse. Like, it's just not, like, by the time we get there,
Yeah.
like, this monster doesn't feel like the right monster. But I love the monster now. The monster now is really
Thanks.
good. So, no, there's a lot of great stuff in there. I think that if we could say one thing about this book in terms of, like, its evolution from Codex to now, is everything feels so much more refined. Everything
Yeah.
feels so much more cohesive and coherent. It wasn't bad in Codex, but gosh, you add best in the hobby or best in the industry editor to the words, you add like time, you add a huge community that's had chance to like play with this stuff, and you just end up with a better product. You know,
Yeah.
like you just benefit from all that in a huge way.
Yeah, we get the benefit of a 2E in our 1E release, right?
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it is. Before we go, I do want to talk about just one more sort of substantive thing, which is the book has this section called, I can't remember what the section's called, but it involves this part of Fort Durin called the Scoundrels Quarter and ideas about connecting Trophy Dark and Trophy Gold.
Oh.
I'm curious, basically, why is this in the book? And how are we hoping people use it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So first, hat tip to Alexi Sargent, who wrote this section, because it's
Yep.
really good.
It's very good.
Essentially, the idea was you have this book full of incursions. They're all 1 or 2 shots. so what's the like replay value? How do I use all of these incursions together? Like, what do I do with them? Can I tell a cohesive story, or am I just telling one shots? So it really started as a way of connecting incursions together in a more meaningful way. And so the way that we've done that is through this little framework called the Scoundrels Quarters, where basically you are developing a neighborhood outside of the context of incursions. So the frame for this was Trophy Gold. So you might play basically Trophy Gold and then you link a series of Trophy Dark incursions, but you could play it with any game. You could do the same kind of thing with D&D if you wanted to. And it's a way to like pull these incursions in and use them essentially as like side quests. So what you do is you have this neighborhood called the Scoundrels Quarters where your treasure hunters live, and your neighborhood is kind of like falling to the forest, and you need to essentially satiate the forest by offering sacrifices in the form of sending out other characters on death marches, sending them into the forest on incursions, right? So that's the general idea, is that your neighborhood has a rune. The rune will go up, but as you do these incursions, as you do the Trophy Dark incursions, the rune goes back down. And it's in the book one as a way to like help people see how they can use this with other games, right? With Trophy Gold, with any other game any other fantasy game they want. And it's also a way to like help people see what Trophy Gold is all about.
Yeah, it's true.
A lot of Trophy Dark players maybe only have like a passing familiarity with Trophy Gold, and it's a way to like see the layout, see the structure, get familiar with it, and maybe dip a toe into that water.
Yeah, because there's a Trophy Gold incursion in there.
Right, exactly.
There's a Trophy Gold incursion in the Trophy Dark book, yeah. Connected to that. Yeah, that's great. That's an interesting aspect, like sort of introducing people to Trophy Gold. That's something I hadn't actually considered, but you're right, because Trophy Dark is a much more established game between the two of them, right? Like it just has a bigger established footprint in terms of like people's mind share.
Yeah.
I'm curious, we say like, okay, you can use Trophy Dark as an epilogue or a prologue for another fantasy game, you know, that kind of, like, I mean, I believe it. Do we think there's something there, you know?
Yeah, there is. There's something.
Is there, like, Jared,
there is. There is. I think there are two things. I think you could totally
I believe it, but convince me.
Yeah. So here's how I would run Advanced Trophy Dark Gold right now. Is I would run between 2 and 5 Trophy Dark incursions and really not change anything, but I would let the players know, like, this is 10 years before Fort Durin becomes a treasure hunter boomtown. And so you are the first idiots to go out there totally unready and unprepared, and you're all going to die. And maybe one of you will make it, but I wouldn't bet on it. We're going to run a couple of games that are just the cautionary tales, but we're also world building, and we're also going to like write things that will be in the bestiary that the Trophy Gold characters will get.
Smart.
And then by the time you are done with 3 to 5 Trophy Dark games, you're going to have a really rich setting. You're going to have 3 pages of names and a bunch of cool setting and a bunch of weird stuff. Like, I love that the players are going to these weird poems written in their bestiary that they don't know what the hell they mean in the marginalia. Sometimes they might run across one of their old characters as a monster. Sometimes they might run across them as bones with treasures laden on them. And I think it's a great way to just lay the foundation for the setting. And there's also a game in my head where you run the Hammer horror movies. Like, you run Dracula, Frankenstein, werewolf, mummy, sea monster, and then the Trophy Gold thing is the like X-Files that comes out of that world. But I think you could do something very similar with Trophy Dark and Trophy Gold. I think you could use Trophy Dark as a fun group of adventures that is also a world building exercise. So it's there. I think it's there.
I've loved the idea. I've been kind of fascinated with the idea of Trophy Dark as a funnel, you know, which is basically what you just described, Judd, essentially.
Yeah.
But more of like a setting level funnel, right?
Yeah.
I wonder if there's a way of playing Trophy Dark as a funnel and then the characters that survive, making them into Trophy Gold characters. That's the easy answer. But like maybe even like translating that to be characters for another type of fantasy game or something. You know, I think there's a lot of like potential there. I think there's a lot of potential to use Trophy Dark as a prologue to the bigger story, right? Like, I think that's a terrific way of using it. Jesse, have you had a chance to play with this idea much yourself in terms of like actually playing?
Just a little bit in terms of like introducing the idea of Trophy Dark generally to people who were not familiar with it and were accustomed to other fantasy games. Run it for a few people who just had no idea, right? Like they thought it was a just generic fantasy game they were stepping into and were giving it a shot. This is at conventions. And that turning into like, oh, I'm going to use this as my teaser in between sessions to help people like figure out what this tomb is really all about.
Yeah, that's
in my 5e game or whatever.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of potential there. I'll be excited to see what people do with it. I mean, especially when all 3 books are done, I think we're going to see some really cool stuff. Like, I think we're going to see some really, really neat stuff. I suspect when Trophy Loom comes out, which should be fairly soon, we're going to see an explosion of Trophy Gold and Trophy Dark incursions, right? Yeah. Because people are going to use the Loom to make incursions, and we might even see some adventures for other games that use those elements. Maybe, fingers crossed. I don't know. We'll see. Yeah. Pretty exciting stuff. So, Jesse, we're still plugging away on our project here, Kickstarter fulfillment. Every day, plink, 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 hammering a little bit more like little stone dwarves in the womb of Mother, plinking away. What's next? Where are we at right now?
Yeah, so working very intensely on Loom right now. That'll be the next book to come out. Essentially, like, getting all the layout and art ready. The words are all in and ready to go. And we're hoping that comes out very soon.
Should be soon. Yeah, pretty soon.
And then beyond that will be gold. And then we'll get these printed and out to everyone.
Nice.
Fabulous, fabulous. Progress is being made, listeners. We're always making progress.
I have never been behind a project this huge, but I have some idea of how big it is to get a project out the door. And congratulations, guys, on just hitting this milestone.
Thank you.
Getting the first PDF out. Just take a moment.
It feels like a milestone.
Yeah, no, take a moment to enjoy that. I feel like it's a grind, as I'm sure you know, and I just want someone to say congratulations and someone to say take a moment to enjoy it. And it's really, the book just looks absolutely beautiful. It really is.
Yeah, it really does.
It's not just that it's stunning, but it's usable. Like, I want to use it at the table.
I bought myself a celebratory cheesecake.
Good.
And ate it.
Bravo.
And then went right back to work. So
good. You know, some of the best advice I got about indie publishing was when a mentor said to me, once a month, if you make a profit, take someone you love out to dinner. Just do it. Like, take your imagination money and have a nice night. Treat yourself to an occasional book that'll inspire you. Like, you've got to take time to enjoy it because it's just a weird endeavor. So celebratory cheesecake is exactly that advice. Like, absolutely. Treat yourself to a cheesecake every time you hit one of these things.
Yeah. The thing is, like, as someone who writes and puts out their own games as well, like, not just publishing other people's games, the thing I've discovered is the world and the people in your world who are not gamers don't understand what you just did necessarily.
Yes.
like they don't know. And so people are not, like, lining up to, like, throw laurels at your feet with your amazing artistic achievement in role-playing games, right? So you kind of have to find your satisfaction in that way, right? You have to figure out, like, what that looks like and do that thing, you know, and take those little bits of, like, positive reinforcement and go with it, you know, because most people are not going to appreciate what you did.
Yeah.
But we appreciate what you did with Trophy Dark, Jesse. It's a
Thank you. I will say, I would be remiss to not call out my wonderful wife who, like, helped make all this possible and who doesn't game, but still was like, that's awesome. You did good.
Let's
go get your cheesecake.
Yeah. Enjoy that cheesecake.
Well, on that note, listeners, that is our show. The Sixth Ring is a production of The Gauntlet. You can find The Gauntlet on Twitter at GauntletRPG. We have a website. It's gauntlet-rpg.com. If you'd like to support the show and everything we do in The Gauntlet, you can do that on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/gauntlet and make a pledge there. We love that. If you cannot support the show financially, we totally understand. Go to iTunes and leave us a 5-star review. That helps us a lot on the algorithmic end of things. Jesse, thank you again for coming on the show. We loved having you.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much. Yeah, my pleasure.
Judd, thank you as always for being here.
Hey, thank you for having me, Jason. This was lovely. And thank you, Rich.
Thank you, Rich.
For making it sound good.
Indeed. And thank you, listeners. Take care. Can you hear the footsteps in the shadows? Can you smell the metal tang of blood on the air? Can you feel the veil between worlds slipping away with each heartbeat? The Between is here. The Between is a tabletop role-playing game about a group of mysterious monster hunters in Victorian-era London. These hunters learn about monsters and killers throughout the city and conduct investigations in order to neutralize them. Over time, they become aware of the plans of a criminal mastermind who is pulling the strings behind the scenes. They will eventually be forced to confront this mastermind in order to save Queen and Country. The Between is directly inspired by the TV show Penny Dreadful, but also takes inspiration from British horror classics, the works of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, pulp-era media, The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and from Hell. It's powered by the Apocalypse and uses the mystery system from our hit game Brindlewood Bay. The Between comes with a 129-page rulebook, 7 playbooks, 10 scenarios or threats, a mastermind campaign sheet, reference sheets, and a supplement called London at Night, The Unseen. The Between PDF is available now on the Gauntlet Patreon. Just go to patreon.com/Gauntlet. The Between will be available on DriveThru RPG starting June 14th.